The courtroom was a grand hall of authority, where the weight of justice was supposed to rest equally upon all shoulders. The polished wooden benches, the towering judge's bench, and the seal of the court mounted high above symbolized a system that had long been revered. Yet, beneath the grandeur, something was amiss. The very institution meant to uphold fairness was now a stage for arrogance, where power had corrupted its wielder beyond recognition. From the moment the session began, it was clear that this was not about justice. It was about control. A man, cloaked in the black robes of authority, presided over the room with an air of unchallenged dominance. He did not view his position as a responsibility, but as a weapon, one he wielded with absolute confidence. His gavel was not merely an instrument of order, but a tool to silence those he disfavored. He reveled in the idea that his words carried the weight of law, that his rulings were final, and that no one, not even the most principled individuals, could stand against him. With each word, his disdain was evident. He spoke with a tone laced with sarcasm, as if the very notion of fairness was beneath him. His smirks, barely concealed, reflected a deep-seated belief that he was untouchable. He had spent years crafting an image of power, ensuring that anyone who entered his courtroom understood one thing: he was in charge. Those who dared to challenge him were met with subtle intimidation, their arguments dismissed before they could fully form. This particular case was no different. From the moment proceedings began, his bias was unmistakable. Every objection that came from one side was promptly overruled, while the other was given free rein to manipulate the discussion. He interrupted at will, never allowing a full defense to be presented. His questioning was not meant to seek truth, but to entrap, twisting words and using them as ammunition. He was a master of this game, one he had played for years without consequence. The room felt the weight of his authority. Attorneys shifted uncomfortably, aware that fairness had no place here. Spectators whispered among themselves, sensing that the outcome had been predetermined before the session even started. Some had seen this before, had watched him use his bench as a throne rather than a pillar of justice. They knew how this would go, or at least they thought they did. The strategy was clear: humiliation. This wasn't merely about ruling in a certain direction. It was about publicly degrading those who stood against him. He enjoyed watching strong individuals falter under his pressure, relishing the moment when they realized that logic and reason held no sway in his courtroom. He interrupted, not out of necessity, but to remind them who held the power. He laughed, not out of amusement, but to show that their words were meaningless. His demeanor grew bolder as the minutes passed. His words became sharper, his interruptions more frequent. He leaned forward, his smirk widening, as if savoring each moment. He wanted a reaction. He thrived on watching frustration build, knowing that he could twist it into something he could use against them. If they raised their voice, he would call them out for disrespect. If they stood their ground, he would accuse them of arrogance. It was a game he always won because he controlled the rules. The courtroom, once a place for truth, had become his personal arena. He had no fear of consequences. Why would he? He had bent the system to his will for years, walking the fine line between legality and corruption without ever facing repercussions. He had silenced those who had tried to expose him before, ensuring that their voices never reached beyond the confines of his court. He had allies who protected him, a network that ensured he remained untouchable. Today was supposed to be no different. He believed he was in complete control, that his words alone would shape the outcome of this case. His confidence was unshaken, his arrogance on full display. He never once considered the possibility that, for the first time, the game he had mastered was about to be played against him. The weight of the courtroom pressed down like an invisible force, heavy with the tension that had been building from the moment the proceedings began. Eyes flickered between the figures at the center of the room, some expectant, others doubtful. It was clear to anyone paying attention that this wasn't just a legal matter, it was a clash of principles, a battle between arrogance and quiet resolve. The imbalance of power was stark, but the moment had arrived to correct it. Despite the condescending tone directed his way, there was no visible reaction. No frustration, no anger, just an unwavering calm that unsettled those expecting an outburst. He didn't need to raise his voice or plead for fairness. Instead, he sat still, his posture steady, his expression unreadable. Every accusation hurled toward him, every attempt to twist the narrative, was met with the same unshaken gaze. When the opportunity finally came to respond, the shift in the room was almost imperceptible at first. There was no grandstanding, no desperate attempt to seize the moment. Instead, his words were measured, deliberate. He spoke not to impress, not to dominate, but to reveal the truth. The condescension thrown his way didn't shake his voice. The mockery didn't alter his tone. Instead, he dismantled each falsehood with undeniable precision, peeling away the layers of deception until nothing but the facts remained. It became clear that this wasn't a man who could be baited into emotional reactions. He wasn't here to engage in petty exchanges or to match arrogance with frustration. He understood the tactics being used against him, recognized them for what they were, and refused to play into them. Instead, he let reason do the work. His words carried a weight that silence could not compete with. They were not overly complex, not grandiose or theatrical, yet they commanded attention. He presented each point with clarity, every sentence backed by undeniable evidence. He wasn't there to argue. He was there to reveal. And as he spoke, the confidence of those who sought to undermine him began to waver. The carefully constructed facade of control was starting to crack. The attempts to trip him up, to manipulate his statements, fell flat as he effortlessly countered each one with the simple power of truth. He didn't rush. He didn't falter. He let the facts speak for themselves, forcing everyone in the room to acknowledge them. It wasn't just what he said, but how he said it. There was no desperation in his voice, no need to seek validation. He wasn't looking for approval or permission. He simply laid out the reality of the situation, leaving no room for distortion. There was a quiet certainty in his tone that unnerved those who had expected him to fold under pressure. The silence between his statements was just as powerful as the words themselves. Every pause forced the room to sit with the truth, to absorb the weight of what had just been said. There was no need for exaggerated rhetoric, just a firm, undeniable dismantling of the falsehoods being used against him. The longer he spoke, the more the power dynamic in the room began to shift. The one who had controlled the narrative with smug overconfidence now found themselves struggling to keep up, scrambling for a response that could turn the tide back in their favor. But it was too late. The control they had once wielded so effortlessly was slipping away, and for the first time, they felt the weight of accountability creeping in. Those who had expected an easy victory watched in stunned silence as the situation unfolded in a way no one had anticipated. What had begun as an attempt to discredit had instead become a moment of reckoning. The arrogance that had once filled the space was beginning to feel like an empty shield, unable to withstand the force of unshakable truth. The shift was undeniable. The tension that had filled the air moments ago was now something different, something unspoken but deeply felt. It was the realization that the narrative had changed, that control had slipped through the fingers of those who had wielded it, unjustly for far too long. The weight of reality was beginning to settle in. The room, once charged with tension and deceit, now held a silence that carried the weight of finality. The spectacle that had played out over the course of the proceedings had reached its inevitable conclusion, and now all that remained was the stark contrast between those who had stood for truth and those who had sought to manipulate it. The carefully constructed illusion of power had crumbled, replaced by the undeniable presence of justice. Every eye in the courtroom remained locked on the unfolding scene, the gravity of the moment sinking in. The arrogance that had once filled the space had vanished, replaced by something far more revealing, an emptiness where certainty had once resided. The shift in energy was palpable, the kind that only comes when a long-standing deception is finally exposed for all to see. Those who had once watched in silence, unsure of whether the truth would prevail, now sat with an unspoken understanding. Between them, there was something deeply satisfying in witnessing the unraveling of a force that had long operated without fear of consequences. This was not just a personal reckoning, it was a statement that no one, no matter how powerful they believed themselves to be, was above accountability. The weight of years of unchecked control, of manipulations and injustices swept under the rug, had finally come crashing down. The room itself seemed to breathe differently, as if the very walls had absorbed the corruption that had existed within them for too long and were now releasing it into the air, clearing space for something long overdue. The realization that the moment had finally arrived settled on those who had been waiting for it. The ones who had fought not with deception or power plays, but with steadfast commitment to what was right, now stood in quiet victory. There was no need for celebration. No need for gloating. The truth had done its work, and that was enough. A presence that had once commanded fear now looked small, insignificant against the sheer force of what had just occurred. Those who had once enabled and protected this kind of unchecked authority found themselves shrinking away, suddenly unwilling to be associated with the consequences now unfolding. The alliances that had once seemed unbreakable were crumbling, as self-preservation took hold among those who had once stood so confidently in the shadows of corruption. The silence stretched on, each passing second serving as a reminder that no amount of manipulation could undo what had been revealed. The power that had been so brazenly wielded for personal gain had been stripped away, leaving nothing but the stark reality of what had been done. There was no escape from it now. A shift in movement broke the stillness, signaling that the moment of reckoning was no longer just theoretical. It was here, unfolding in real time, and there was no stopping it. A presence, firm and unwavering, stepped forward to carry out what had already been decided by forces greater than any individual ego. It was a scene that would be remembered not just by those in the room, but by all who had followed the long trail of injustice leading to this very moment. This was not just about one case, one moment in time. It was about something far bigger, the restoration of faith in what was supposed to stand above corruption and personal ambition. The consequences that had been so confidently ignored were now inescapable. The weight of accountability had finally caught up, and there was no bargaining, no evasion, no escape route that could change that. What had once seemed untouchable had been touched. What had once seemed beyond the reach of justice had now fallen, squarely within its grasp. As the moment played out, those who had once feared speaking out now found themselves standing taller. The oppressive force that had loomed over them for so long had been dismantled piece by something stronger: integrity, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to what was right. The victory was not loud, not brash, but deeply felt. The presence of justice had reclaimed its place, reminding everyone in the room that no matter how long corruption thrives, no matter how invincible it may seem, the truth will always find a way to break through. And when it does, there is nothing more powerful. The weight of the moment lingered in the air, a powerful reminder that justice, though sometimes delayed, could never be denied forever. What had once been an arena of unchecked power had been reclaimed by truth, leaving no room for manipulation, no space for deception. The arrogance that had filled the room at the start of the proceedings had vanished, replaced by the unmistakable presence of accountability. There was no dramatic outburst, no last-minute attempt to change the course of events. The realization had already set in. The ones who had once controlled the narrative, who had silenced opposition with a mere word or gesture, now found themselves stripped of their illusion of authority. The very foundation they had built their influence upon had crumbled beneath them, and there was no rebuilding it now. The silence in the courtroom was no longer tense but reflective. The people who had watched everything unfold, some with doubt, others with quiet hope, now understood what they had witnessed. This was not just the downfall of one individual. It was the breaking of a pattern, the undoing of a system that had thrived on fear and coercion. It was proof that the truth, when armed with patience and resilience, could stand against even the most formidable forces. For too long, justice had been treated as a weapon rather than a guiding principle. But now, in this moment, it had been restored to its rightful place. There were no more games to be played, no more distortions to be spun. The facts had spoken for themselves, and they had been heard. The finality of it all settled in as the necessary actions were carried out. The power that had once been so effortlessly wielded was now meaningless, reduced to nothing more than a failed illusion. The one who had orchestrated so much deceit now faced the very system they had believed themselves to be above. And so, as the doors closed behind those who had come to enact justice, the message was clear. No one is untouchable. No one is above the truth. It may take time, it may face obstacles, but in the end, justice will always find its way to those who believe themselves immune to it. The courtroom, now emptied of corruption, stood as a symbol of what had transpired. A reminder that arrogance and power could never outlast the force of integrity. Those who had come seeking fairness left knowing they had witnessed something that would not easily be forgotten. The echoes of the past had finally been silenced, replaced by a truth that could not be denied. The fight had been long, the battle hard fought, but in the end, justice had